Assalamu alaikum viewers. This is Qasser Rashid here. I'm very privileged to have Honorable General Ehsan Ul Haq, retired, who was a former Chairman Joint Chief of Staff of Pakistan Armed Forces and also a former Director General ISI Pakistan. We will have a talk with him. This discussion is purely in relation to the current situation in Afghanistan. And also there has been a small misperception which is being circulated about hashtagging Pakistan, of Pakistan's role in Afghanistan. So I thought General Ehsan Saab's view would enlighten us in relation to exactly what's happening, what is the ground reality over there, and what exactly. So, General Saab, welcome to the to this program, and thank you very much for taking time and joining us today.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Hello, viewers. Assalamu alaikum.
So let's start, General Saab. Please briefly, well, you don't need any introduction, frankly speaking, but please briefly mention to our viewers, your postings, your background.
Since the program relates to Afghanistan, so I'll also relate my introduction also to Afghanistan. I have been associated with Afghanistan and Pakistan-Afghanistan relations now for more than 42 years, and at a policy level. Even as a young officer also, I had the privilege to be introduced to the issues related to Afghanistan and Pakistan-Afghanistan relations way back in 1978. And that gave one a good insight into how the situation there developed and a context to what is the situation in Afghanistan now. I was the Corps Commander in Peshawar on the day of the 9/11, and I vividly recall my sense that this very, I would say, catalytic event will change not only our personal lives, but also the lives of people in Pakistan, Afghanistan, in fact, globally. Now, thereafter, the day the bombing of Afghanistan commenced, which was on the 7th of October 2001, I was asked to take over as the Director General of the Inter-Services Intelligence, which is Pakistan's National Intelligence Service, and deal directly with the issues coming out of the situation in Afghanistan. So ever since, I have been associated with that. After my retirement, I have been engaged in a number of corporate, think tank, and track 2 activities. I am the patron of several think tanks and other social organizations, social service organizations. And I am part of several track 2s, including track 2's conferences on Afghanistan, India-Pakistan relations, US-Pakistan relations, other regional relations like Middle East, North Africa, and so on. I'm also associated very closely in an advisory role with the Belt Road Initiative. So these are some of the things which keep me busy.
Thank you very much, General Saab. This is very enlightening, and I'm sure the viewers will absolutely find credibility. And there's no doubt that you are more than an expert when it comes to talking about Afghanistan, which is the subject of today. Now, would you please tell us exactly what's been happening in Afghanistan?
Well, the problems of Afghanistan started uh, in the early 70s. And it started because of a tussle between the liberal forces in Afghanistan and the conservative forces in Afghanistan, which, as you may be aware, the liberal forces were identified with the Soviet Union, and they were leftists, they were communists. That led to then President Daoud taking over in
That's right.
Afghanistan through a military coup. And President Daoud was well known in Pakistan and in Afghanistan as a nationalist who was a hardliner when it came to relations with Pakistan, and who believed that the Pashtunistan issue must be provoked and a Pashtunistan state must come about at the cost of Pakistani territories. So that is from where the problem started. He also was reported to be interested in bringing about a constitutional monarchy in Afghanistan and liberalize the Afghan society, for which he didn't really make much progress, because with that military coup, there was also a strong conservative resistance within Afghanistan. Then it led on to a communist takeover, because when in 1978, when the Afghan people responded to these liberal actions, and there was a tussle between the conservative religious elements and the communist forces, it led to the 1978 Sour Revolution in April 1978, which President Tarakai, who was a communist, came in. And then that led to, as things weren't really coming under control, it led to the Soviet occupation in by the end of 1979. And we have been personal witnesses, direct witnesses to these events. These are not things which we have learned from books of history. No, we have directly seen and participated in events and actions related to these developments. As you know, the Soviet occupation and Afghan resistance started, led by the United States. And what they did was that they provoked, supported an insurgency in Afghanistan. And that insurgency was a jihadist insurgency. Muslim fighters from throughout the world were brought in to fight the Afghan jihad of the 80s.
Right.
And we know what happened. The Soviets ultimately were compelled, they were defeated and compelled to withdraw from Afghanistan. Now, this entire infrastructure that was created to defeat the Soviets in Afghanistan formed the basis of what was happened thereafter in the 90s and what has been happening till this day. Because the Americans and other Western powers, after defeating the Soviets, they just washed off their hands from Afghanistan and said, well, we are going, this is now Pakistan's problem. And they declared their victory in the Cold War against the Soviet Union. Now, the benefit of this victory in the Cold War, the peace dividend, went to the United States, became the sole superpower, and it went to the West. But the victims of that victory, unfortunately, were the people of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now the same thing is happening again. Now we were sanctioned And we were told that, look, you have to put this thing together. It's your problem. And this is what we struggled with through the 90s.
Yes.
And it was in that environment when the people of Afghanistan, fed up with the infighting of the jihadi groups, which had splintered and were fighting with each other, which led to the rise of the Taliban. Now, again, there is a very important thing to remember. If you make an assessment or if you make an assumption based on incomplete or faulty information, then your conclusion can never be right. Now, this is exactly what has happened. The assumption has been that the Taliban were raised by Pakistan, which is not true, which is absolutely incorrect. Since that is the assumption, and it's a faulty assumption, the conclusion that they arrive at is that since Pakistan raised them, Pakistan has happy, officious. We come on to what happened on the events of 9/11. We find that since the Taliban were ruling and they very successfully defeated all the other forces in Afghanistan between 1995 and 96, and thereafter the Taliban government was set up in Kabul. Again, there is a fallacy. It is assumed that since Pakistan recognized Afghanistan, the Taliban government, so that means we have an enormous amount of influence over Afghanistan. Now, why did we recognize them? Let me clear it here. If we were in New Zealand, we didn't have to bother about Afghanistan so much. But we were not New Zealand. We have a 2,600 kilometer border with Afghanistan. Other countries can take their time. Pakistan didn't have that sort of a option. We had to deal with Afghanistan regardless of who was ruling in Kabul. And that has exactly been our history of our relations with Afghanistan. And that is the basis of why Pakistan recognized the then Afghan Taliban government in Kabul and tried to moderate and tried to tell others also to engage and moderate their stance on various issues. Led on to 9/11. Post 9/11, Pakistan very clearly decided to align itself with the international community, because our engagement and our recognition of the Taliban government was not very successful and had led to our isolation internationally. So we very clearly decided that we will stand with the international community on how it deals with Afghanistan. And you find, as a consequence, Pakistan de-recognized the Taliban government. The Afghan ambassador here was told to leave. And when he refused to leave, he was asked to go to Torkham and go across into Afghanistan. That is the situation up till 9/11. Now we can go forward. Yes. And we find that the Americans, along with their other coalition partners, came into Afghanistan 9/11. And they opted for a kinetic or for a military solution. I recall in October 2001, when President Musharraf met President Bush for the first time in New York. I was a part of the meeting. And I can tell you that the first thing Pakistan told our American interlocutors was, right at the highest level, at the president level, is that there is no military solution there,
Hmm.
and that they must immediately transit to a political solution. Definitely, our advice was never heeded. And moreover, even within Afghanistan, the new leadership coming out of the Northern Alliance definitely wanted to rule Afghanistan. And they were not prepared for a political solution. They wanted to occupy, capture all territories of Afghanistan with American military support and to be installed in Kabul with the American military support. And this is what we saw happen there. Thereafter, when a transition to a political structure was being carried out, which was done through the bond process, we found that even the bond process was faulty because it was not an inclusive conference and it didn't attempt to seek an inclusive solution. The Taliban, and also by default, the Pashtun, which are the largest minority, largest ethnic group in Afghanistan, were actually totally underrepresented in the first bond process. And we found an exclusive arrangement being imposed in Pakistan, sorry, in Afghanistan, which continued now for 20 years. So this is now what we are seeing. And as we move forward, we found that these attempts at a military solution, and since the military solution did not exist, it led to a military stalemate. And consequently, there was a realization by the Americans that they cannot continue with this forever war.
Right.
And after 2014, they decided to gradually withdraw their forces. And we see that as a consequence of the withdrawal, the Taliban have resurfaced, rejuvenated, and they are now dominating the military space in Afghanistan.
Thank you very much, General Saab. You have provided us a very explicit and informed overview, which will certainly benefit the wider communities and their perspective and perception about the background and how the making of Taliban and so on. We understand that US have pretty much withdrawn from Afghanistan. Obviously, this leaves a very sort of uncertain situation over there. Now, we actually are having a sort of movement here. Again, a perception is being escalated that, Pakistan has a role in this. And I understand that you personally have a Pashtun background as well. So, I'm sure that the details that you could provide, the light that you can shed, would certainly give us another round of informed perspective on this as to what is happening in Afghanistan today and what is Pakistan's role in it.
Yes, I am a Pashtun, and that of course gives me a little more perspective on the developments there and also on Pakistan's policies. Now, actually, since there wasn't a military solution, so a paradigm had been placed in Afghanistan, which was based on a kinetic, on a military solution. And that implied a strong military backing to the regime or the government in Kabul. And the government in Kabul was entirely dependent on that military backing. So the moment that military backing was to go away, naturally this government, which was seen by the Taliban and by many other people in Afghanistan as a puppet, its days were numbered. It was very obvious. There was no attempt made over the years to broaden the base of support for this dispensation in Kabul. It is the first mistake that was made. Secondly, please understand that the Taliban were never entirely defeated. And if you recall, when there was a US attempt to seek a political solution after President Bush had completed his administration had completed his term, and President Obama came on the scene. So his famous new strategy for Afghanistan, in which he said that we will now we'll lead with a political track. Even he had to first commence with a military surge. And he increased the number of American troops in Afghanistan to over 100,000. And the reason was because there was a military stalemate. The US and NATO forces were unable to defeat the Taliban. They were unable to control all territories of Afghanistan. The consequence was there was a realization that as we move out, we must seek an agreement with the Taliban. And the Taliban knew that they were on the ascendant right from then. There's also a misperception as if the Taliban have suddenly launched an offensive in the last May and they have captured all these territories. This is not true. Even before 2014, there were a number of Afghan districts which were controlled by the Taliban. There were vast tracts of Afghan territory in which NATO, American, and Afghan forces could not operate. This was very well known that all the rural areas of Afghanistan were dominated by the Taliban. I mean, the anecdote that would go around is that, well, NATO dominates during daylight hours and the Taliban dominate at night.
Right.
And this was applicable to not only the remote areas of Afghanistan, even in areas in the close proximity of Kabul.
Right. The
American, NATO, and Afghan forces could not venture out at night. And the number of districts that were falling to the Taliban were gradually growing, even before the American withdrawal started. And there were large areas, as I said, way back in May, before the Afghan offensive started, there were more than 170 districts which were Taliban dominated or controlled. So this perception is wrong. Second, this perception that somehow or the other Pakistan is involved. Well, if Pakistan was involved, why would we fence our border? Why would we spend, Pakistan is going through some economic challenges. And we need every dollar that we can scrounge for our own development. Why should we be venturing close to $1 billion to fence the Afghan border? If we could do without that, why shouldn't we do that? But we definitely thought that we must do that. And let me tell you, this proposal for fencing the border was first initiated in 2005 by President Musharraf. And it was President Karzai and the Afghan government vehemently opposed the fencing of on the one hand, they would tell us that people are coming from Afghanistan, from Pakistan to Afghanistan. On the other hand, they would say, you are not going to fence it. Secondly, we try to every possible way to control any movement on that border by implementing a biometric checking of all Afghans and Pakistanis who were crossing the Pak-Afghan border. And you would know that almost at that time, there were more than 60,000 people crossing these borders every day. And we would issue them biometric cards. These biometric cards would be torn by the Afghan administration. And they would not let any biometric checking of who is coming and going be implemented. So who is to blame if there was anybody coming and going on that border? Not Pakistan. Thirdly, if it was to be a Pakistani effort, then it should have started from the districts adjoining Pakistan. But if you look at what has happened over the last 2-3 months, the Taliban have captured northern Afghanistan, which is the farthest from Pakistan's border. They have captured the districts adjoining Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Iran. And the minimum areas that they have captured so far are on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border site. That in itself should militarily explain that it can't be from Pakistan. And if there are people moving from Pakistan and they enter Afghanistan and they travel the whole length and breadth of Afghanistan to go to the other end of Afghanistan, then the failure is not of Pakistan. The failure is of the Afghan government, the Afghan military, the Afghan security services, that they couldn't stop these people starting from the Pakistan border, traveling 400, 500, 700 kilometers through Afghanistan and going it to the other end of Afghanistan. So it doesn't make any sense. Yes, the US is a superpower. NATO, is the strongest military alliance in history.
Correct.
For them to accept defeat is not going to be easy. They must find somebody else responsible, must scapegoat somebody else.
Right.
And of course, we have been an easy scapegoat. But let me tell you, I think now there's a strong realization in Pakistan that enough is enough. We have done enough for Afghanistan. We have done enough to support the war that was brought into Afghanistan over the last 20 years. And as a consequence, we have suffered so much. Just to give you an example, the US had one 9/11 and suffered 3,000 casualties. We had a 9/11 every 2 months because we suffered 80,000 casualties. So we must very clearly understand that Pakistan has not been a beneficiary of destabilization and turbulence in Afghanistan. And we are not going to benefit if there's going to be instability in Afghanistan. It is in Pakistan's best interest that Afghanistan is stabilized, and we have sacrificed enormously for that in human lives, in our economic opportunities, in our turbulence, in our streets, our places of worship. Even our schools and hospitals have been attacked by terrorists. So naturally, we would like peace and stability to come to Afghanistan. And that is been the government's policy, enduring government policy from the beginning.
Right, so thank you very much. And that was very enlightening. I think it's an eye-opener, especially for the communities who are not living in Pakistan and usually read what's portrayed on media is very one-sided and one-eyed. But the information that you've shared, sir, today, they're actually very, very informative, very detailed. and I'm sure they will equally benefit the viewers as well. May I please, by virtue of your experience, ask you that how do you see ways moving forward? What do you think are the solutions or options in Afghanistan moving forward?
First of all, we have to contain the detractors of, of peace in Afghanistan. You must understand that wars, conflicts develop their own lobbies. They develop their own beneficiaries. And they have beneficiaries of the Afghan conflict for the last 20 years in Afghanistan itself, as well as in the United States and many other countries. And then there have been regional detractors. And the one example which stands out very clearly is India, who would like this conflict to continue because they are benefiting out of it. If this was to end, they, what they have benefited from will come to an end. So this has to be the first thing that has to be done. In fact, I very strongly feel that there are a number of characters in Afghanistan who keep bad-mouthing Pakistan. Some of these people have to be tried as war criminals simply because they were responsible for stretching this war, for extending it over the last 20 years. One clear example is people like Amrullah Saleh. These are the people who have always acted as the conflict lobby, who have always tried to undermine any efforts towards seeking a political solution. And this is exactly what he has tried to say yesterday also. These people must be tried as criminals, as war criminals, as enemies of the people of Afghanistan, because this war could have ended much earlier. This could have transited to a political solution much earlier, right in 2 to 3 years or 4 years after 9/11. But it was characters like these who made sure that it continues to stretch and extend, and that the US and NATO involvement in Afghanistan goes into perpetuity. Now, I remember many years back, the Americans would insist that they would like to have a peace process, but that they will not talk about withdrawal of US forces in Afghanistan. So I would always say that there cannot be a peace process unless the withdrawal of all foreign forces is on the table. And I said, the moment you put that on the table, a peace process will take shape and it will happen. And this is exactly what happened. Now they have picked up a second point. They are insisting that the present dispensation in Kabul is what must survive, and a peace process must be structured around this dispensation. The Taliban have very clearly said that they will not deal with Ashraf Ghani. They will not make a peace deal, and they will not have a ceasefire as long as President Ashraf Ghani is in power. Now, let me also tell you, there is a strong political consensus among the other political forces in Afghanistan on this issue. Recently, over the last few days, you would have heard that there are voices being raised that President Ashraf Ghani should resign. Now, these voices have not come from abroad. These voices have come from Afghan politicians who were in Doha. And they said that there should be a broader peace deal between the political forces, all political forces of Afghanistan and the Taliban, less Ashraf Ghani. That is something which must be understood, which the people of Pakistan and the people of Afghanistan must understand. This is what is happening in Doha. This is what are the voices being raised by forces who are not around in that small clique formed around President Ashraf Ghani. Now, in my view, there are two, three things which are very important for moving forward and making a peace process. Number one, there's an international and regional consensus that Afghanistan must have an inclusive political government. That is important, and the regional countries must support a peace process jointly. It cannot be, yes, the Afghans will be in the lead, but all the regional forces must work together, and they must put their maximum influence on all the warring parties in Afghanistan to arrive at a solution. So first, it has to be a regional effort supported by the international community. Second, it must bring about an inclusive political dispensation in Afghanistan. And it must lead to a ceasefire. There must not be an attempt to impose again. The big mistake after 2001 was a military solution and an exclusive dispensation. This must be an inclusive dispensation based on political consensus between all the forces. And if President Ashraf Ghani has to sacrifice for the future of Afghanistan, I'm sure, having been the president there for the last 7 years, he will understand how critical it is for his own country and his own people. This is how and thereafter, let me add, the international community must continue to support Afghanistan because Afghanistan has been destroyed. It needs to be rebuilt. It must continue to engage. It must ensure that these forces which come together in Afghanistan can move on to running the country in a inclusive, peaceful, transparent, democratic way. That is what I feel is the way for peace and stability in Afghanistan. And there must not be any foreign interference. That is critical. Pakistan discontinued any interference in Afghanistan way earlier, before 9/11. But others have continued to be there and have used Afghanistan, unfortunately, to carry out acts of terror within Pakistan, India being the leading instance of that.
Sab, I think you have definitely highlighted and provided a very valid and logical solution moving forward. It absolutely makes sense that democracy, the leadership should reflect the democracy. And if Taliban's who are actually rightfully in majority by way of the numbers and so on, and you've also mentioned that the wider groups do not support the current President Ashraf Ghani over there either. So that is an important thing which needs to be addressed. You mentioned that foreign interference, it should be also controlled. And I noted you talked about having a role that India has been playing in Afghanistan. I mean, they've had a large number of consulates over there in different cities. It needs to be, there's an obvious, it's no brainer. You could see there's a link of the current campaign. The reason I'm saying that, because with lots of community members, especially who have Afghani background that we speak over here with, they actually, they love Pakistan. They like Pakistan, and they've been very thankful of the patronage that Pakistan has provided, the brother they've showed, the hosting of about 7 million refugees, which is about 2 million more than what New Zealand population is. So, all those gestures that Pakistan have shown in the past, it's that brotherhood is there. But obviously, there's a very small number who clearly it seems that they have been separately patronized, supported to raise. And you mentioned that there is some bad mouthing happening over there as well, which actually does not truly depict what the situation is in Afghanistan. That is the case. I think it's important to discuss that what's the interest that India would be having in this, and why. I mean, it's not helping Afghan situation. In fact, any further if they continue to escalate their view in this situation.
You see, India's malafide intent and their devious games that they have played in Afghanistan are now exposed. I just quote one instance when there are difficulties in our relations after President Ashraf Ghani came into power, and he went very close to the Indians. There was a lot of talk about a trade air bridge between Afghanistan and India. I hope now, in these difficult times, there will be a refugee air bridge between Afghanistan and India. And India will not just pick and choose those people who were working for Indian interests in Afghanistan and take them to India. I hope they will take ordinary Afghans, a couple of 100,000, as refugees into India. We'll be watching that very carefully as Pakistan is told to open its borders for refugees. We hope India, as the great supporter and benefactor of Afghanistan, will pick up also not 1 million, not even 500,000, but at least a couple of 100,000 ordinary Afghans. Of course, they should not pick up people who have been working to promote the Indian interests in Afghanistan. That would be a test of what India's great friendship and attitude towards Afghanistan has been.
Exactly. You have explicitly, I think, summarized that, and exactly we look forward to that too. In fact, that will be a test, and see how that goes. General Saab, thank you very much for your time. You've been very enlightening, and in fact, the perspective that you've shared with us today, it is an eye-opener in many ways, and it does clarify as to exactly what's happening in Afghanistan, the background, the history, and moving forward, what the solutions could be. I thank you once again on behalf of Pakistanis living in New Zealand, and also as a journalistic perspective that, where we are in regards to, I mean, Pakistan is progressing immensely. And today is 14th of August, which is the 74th year since Pakistan came into existence. And before I actually extend the greetings to you, please say a few words that our viewers would also appreciate coming from you.
First of all, I would like to convey the Azadi Mubarak to all our Pakistani brothers and sisters. It's indeed a very, very important day for us as Pakistanis. And I can see the celebrations that my children and my grandchildren are engaged in since last evening. And of course, this is what is happening all over the country. And I am sure this is with all the Pakistani communities throughout the world. So please do celebrate this. It's indeed a great thing to happen to the Muslims of South Asia, for them to have an independent country. This is, when we look at what is happening in India, particularly as a consequence of Hindutva, how the minorities in India are being treated, one cannot but salute the Qaid, and one cannot but appreciate and hail his enormous vision that Pakistan, that Muslims are a separate nation and that they must have a separate state. If Pakistan had not come about, God forbid, our condition would have been, as we are seeing of the Muslims in India, or maybe worse than that. Because now, at least even for the Muslims in India, Pakistan is a hope. But if that hope had not been realized in 1947 on 14th of August, I am afraid the situation would have been even more hopeless. So our salute to the Qaid, to his colleagues, to his supporters at that time, for all those who struggled for the independence of Pakistan. The onus is now on us to realize, because the dream has a long way to be realized. It will be realized when Pakistan is a very prosperous, every Pakistani is prosperous. And Pakistan is a very strong, highly respected country internationally. And we have to continue. This is a continuous struggle. We have to continue to do that.
Thank you very much once again. And you also have a lovely day today. And I'm very pleased to hear that you and your family have been celebrating the Independence Day. We had a lovely celebration. I mean, we're about 7 hours ahead of Pakistan. So it's 9, with that. So we had a lovely celebrations in New Zealand, all over New Zealand. It actually started from 31st of July in one of the cities. So every weekend we've had a celebration from one city to the other. Most big cities had celebrations today. And there was a colorful concourse full of love that children actually presented and demonstrated. Wonderful way to reconnect ourselves and also share our neighborhood with the local communities over here. So the lovely words and the wishes that you extended, thank you very much, sir. I totally value that. And I'm very honored to have this opportunity of speaking with you tonight. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.